Nora Daniels sat quietly in the lawyer's office, her hands resting on her lap. The air was thick and heavy, as if everyone in the room was holding their breath. Beside her sat her parents, Michael and Elaine, and her older brother Luke. No one spoke. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound that dared to move. The lawyer, a calm man in his 50s, adjusted his glasses and began to read her grandfather's will. Nora listened, her heart beating faster with every word. Her grandfather, Richard Daniels, had passed away 2 months ago, and this was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The moment to hear what he had left behind. When the lawyer finally said, "I, Richard Daniels, leave the sum of $45 million to my granddaughter, Nora Daniels," the entire room fell silent. Nora's eyes widened. She looked at her parents, expecting a smile, maybe even pride. But what she saw was something else entirely. Her mother's face went pale. Her father's eyes grew dark. Luke looked confused, almost angry. For a moment no one moved. Then Michael suddenly stood up. "What did you just say?" he demanded. The lawyer repeated the words, slowly and clearly. "The inheritance goes to Miss Nora Daniels." Michael's hands shook as he reached for the check the lawyer was holding. "This has to be a mistake," he said through clenched teeth. "It's written in the will, sir," the lawyer replied carefully. Michael's jaw tightened. No, he wouldn't do this," he muttered. His face turned red as he looked at Nora. "What did you do to him? Did you convince him to give this to you?" Nora's lips parted, but no sound came out. "Dad, I didn't." Before she could finish, Michael struck a match from his pocket. Without warning, he set the corner of the check on fire. Elaine gasped and tried to stop him, but he held it up high, watching it burn. The paper curled and blackened as flames devoured it. The smell of smoke filled the room. Nora's heart pounded. Everyone froze in disbelief, even the lawyer. When the last bit of the check turned to ashes, Michael dropped it onto the floor and glared at Nora. "This family doesn't need your kind of betrayal," he spat. Nora sat frozen, her eyes fixed on the ashes. Her throat tightened as tears filled her eyes. She could hardly breathe. "Why?" she whispered softly, her voice trembling. "Why would my own parents destroy the one thing he left me?" Nora grew up in a family that valued her brother more than her. She was the quiet, bookish one who often stayed in her room reading while others laughed and talked without her. Her parents, Michael and Elaine, always praised Luke for everything he did. When he scored an average grade, they called him brilliant. When Nora got top marks, they barely noticed. It was as if she was invisible in her own home. The only person who truly saw Nora was her grandfather, Richard Daniels. He had a calm voice and kind eyes that always softened when he looked at her. He used to say, "You have your grandmother's heart and my patience. That's rare, Nora. Don't ever lose it." When her parents brushed her aside, her grandfather stepped in. He helped her with schoolwork, listened to her dreams, and told her she could be anything she wanted. It was Richard who encouraged her to study law. He said she had a sharp mind and a quiet strength that would make her a good lawyer. He paid for her education when her parents refused. Michael had said, "Why waste money on her? She'll just end up married and working part-time." Nora had overheard those words one night, and they stayed with her for years. Her grandfather didn't argue. He simply wrote the check and told her, "Go make me proud." And she did. Nora graduated top of her class, but even at her graduation, her parents barely smiled. They clapped politely and went back to talking about Luke's new business venture. Her grandfather hugged her tight and whispered, "You've done well, my girl. The world will see what they refused to see." Her parents never liked how close she was to him. They often called her his little puppet, saying he spoiled her. Nora didn't argue. She just kept studying and visiting her grandfather, finding comfort in his quiet wisdom. Years later, when her grandfather fell ill, Nora was the only one who stayed by his side. She visited him in the hospital every day, reading him his favorite books and bringing him homemade soup. Her parents only came for short visits, usually to ask questions about the family business or money. Her grandfather noticed, and though he never said much, his eyes often filled with disappointment. After his death, Nora felt an emptiness she couldn't describe. Losing him was like losing the only person who had ever truly loved her. Now, sitting in her small apartment weeks after the will reading, Nora stared at her phone. Her parents hadn't spoken to her since that day in the lawyer's office. Her mother had stormed out crying. Her father's face had been red with anger. and Luke had looked at her with cold eyes. The silence that followed was painful but expected. Nora had lived through their rejection before, though it never stopped hurting. One evening her phone rang. It was Mr. Harris, the family lawyer. "Nora," he said kindly, "I wanted to let you know the estate transfer can still be completed. Your grandfather's wishes were very clear." Nora hesitated. "But my parents, they burned the check. They said they'd never allow it." "The will is legally binding," Mr. Harris explained. "However, your parents have decided to contest it. They're claiming your grandfather was not in the right state of mind when he made his decision." Nora closed her eyes. "Of course they are," he continued. "You don't have to decide now, but if you want to challenge their claim, you'll need to prepare for a court case." After the call ended, Nora sat in silence. Her thoughts were heavy. She looked around her small apartment. The plain walls, the books stacked on her desk, the framed photo of her and her grandfather. He was smiling in that picture, his arm around her shoulders. She whispered, "You trusted me with something huge, Grandpa. But I don't know if I can do this." Part of her wanted to walk away. The money, though life-changing, felt poison now, tangled up in years of pain and bitterness. But another part of her, the part her grandfather believed in, knew she couldn't let them destroy his last wish. For most of her life, Nora had stayed quiet, letting others decide what she deserved. But this time felt different. This time, walking away would mean agreeing that she wasn't worthy, and she couldn't do that anymore. As the night grew darker, Nora sat by her window, the city lights flickering outside. She made her decision silently, her hands trembling slightly. If her parents wanted a fight, she would give them one. Not out of greed, but out of respect, for herself, and for the only man who ever believed in her. Nora discovered the truth one quiet evening while going through some documents sent by the family lawyer. She sat at her small kitchen table, papers spread out before her, a cup of cold coffee untouched beside her hand. The lawyer had said these were medical and legal records related to her grandfather's estate. But as she began to read, something didn't feel right. Her heart started to pound as she noticed her grandfather's signature on one of the forms, a medical consent form dated just a week before he passed away. The signature looked strange, uneven, shaky in a way that didn't match his usual handwriting. She frowned and looked closer. Then her eyes caught something even worse, her parents' signatures on the witness line. She read the document again and again until her stomach twisted. It stated that her grandfather, Richard Daniels, was not of sound mind and required assistance to make financial decisions. That single sentence could change everything. If true, it would mean his will could be declared invalid. But Nora knew it wasn't true. Her grandfather had been weak in his final days, but his mind had been sharp as ever. He had spoken to her clearly, asking her to promise that she'd take care of his foundation plans. He had even joked about how her father would be furious when he learned she was getting the inheritance. Her hands trembled as she picked up another document. This one looked like a rewritten version of the will. The names had been changed. Luke Daniels was listed as the main beneficiary, not her. And the signature was again forged. Tears filled Nora's eyes as the realization hit her. Her parents had tried to change everything. They had forged medical papers and tried to paint her grandfather as mentally unstable, so they could take control of his estate. It wasn't just greed. It was control. The same control they had used over her since childhood. They couldn't stand that her grandfather had chosen her, not them, to carry on his legacy. She knew she couldn't stay silent. The next morning, she drove to her parents' house. Her heart raced as she stood outside the door, but she forced herself to knock. Elaine opened it, surprise flashing across her face before she frowned. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to both of you," Nora said firmly. Michael appeared from the living room, his expression hard. "We have nothing to discuss." "Yes, we do," Nora replied, stepping inside. "I found the documents, the forged consent forms, the fake will. You tried to declare Grandpa mentally unfit before he died." Elaine's face went pale, but Michael didn't flinch. He crossed his arms. "You shouldn't be going through private family documents." "They weren't private," Nora snapped. "They were part of the legal files. And you lied. You forged his signature. You tried to erase everything he wanted." Michael's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand how business works, Nora. Your grandfather was old and confused. He didn't know what he was doing. That's not true, Nora said, her voice shaking. He knew exactly what he was doing. He trusted me because you and Mom only cared about his money. He left me that inheritance because he wanted to protect it from you. Michael's face turned red with anger. He slammed his hand on the table. You were never meant to be the Daniels legacy. That was Luke's role. You were supposed to stay out of the way, but instead, you've caused chaos. Nora took a step back, tears filling her eyes. So that's it? You hate that Grandpa believed in me. Elaine finally spoke, her voice cold and sharp. He ruined this family when he gave you that money. You don't deserve it. Nora stared at them, her chest aching. She felt like she was 12 years old again, being scolded for something she didn't do. But this time, she wasn't going to shrink away. She wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. You can lie, forge, and shout all you want, but I'm not giving up. I'm taking this to court. If you want to fight me, then fight me there. Michael glared at her, his voice low and full of fury. You'll regret this, Nora. Maybe, she said softly, her voice trembling but firm. But I'd regret it more if I stayed silent. With that, she turned and walked out the door. The wind outside felt cold against her face, but for the first time in her life, she felt free. She knew what she had to do, and no matter how painful it would be, she was ready to fight for the truth. The legal battle begins. Nora sits in the courtroom, her heart pounding as she faces her father's powerful team of lawyers. She wears a simple black suit, her hair neatly tied back, and her files stacked in front of her. She looks calm, but inside her nerves are shaking. She is representing herself, alone against her own family. Across the room, her parents sit beside their lawyers, dressed in expensive clothes and cold expressions. Her father, Michael, won't even look at her. Her mother, Elaine, stares straight ahead, her lips pressed tightly together. Luke, her brother, sits behind them, avoiding her eyes. The judge enters, and the courtroom falls silent. The case of Daniels versus Daniels begins. Michael's lawyers start first. They claim Nora manipulated her grandfather when he was sick. They say she influenced him to change the will and used his illness to her advantage. The words sting, but Nora listens quietly, taking notes. She knows the truth, and she's determined to prove it. When it's her turn to speak, she stands up slowly. Your Honor, she says, her voice trembling but steady. My grandfather, Richard Daniels, was not confused or weak when he wrote that will. He was clear. He knew exactly what he wanted. He left the inheritance to me because he trusted me. Not because I asked him to, but because he believed in me. Her father's lawyer interrupts her again and again, trying to break her confidence. But Nora stays calm, answering with logic and facts. Days turn into weeks. The court sessions are long and painful. Old wounds reopen. Reporters begin writing about the family feud. People whisper in the hallways of the courthouse, pointing at her as she walks by. Then one afternoon, new evidence is presented. Nora holds her breath as the opposing lawyer opens a file. Inside are financial records, proof that Michael and Elaine had secretly taken money from the family business years ago. They had drained millions without Richard's knowledge, leaving him to rebuild the company almost from scratch. Gasps fill the courtroom. Nora's mother covers her mouth, her face pale. Her father looks furious, but his eyes flicker with guilt for a split second. Nora steps forward. This, she says softly, is why my grandfather changed his will. He didn't want his legacy destroyed again. The judge orders a deeper investigation. Suddenly, the case turns against her parents. Their lawyers grow tense. Every session now feels like a battle. Truth versus lies, loyalty versus greed. Outside the courtroom, Nora begins receiving strange, anonymous messages on her phone. The first one reads, "Drop the case or you'll regret it." She deletes it, thinking it's just a scare tactic. But then more messages come. You don't know who you're dealing with. Stop now before it's too late. At night, she barely sleeps. The stress begins to eat at her. She starts losing weight, her eyes dark with exhaustion. Her boss at the small law firm notices and tells her to take time off, but soon after, she receives an email saying her position has been filled. She's been quietly replaced. Then, the worst blow comes from the one person she thought she could rely on, her fiancé Ethan. He visits her one evening, holding a serious look on his face. "Nora, maybe it's time to let this go," he says gently. She looks up from her desk, confused. "Let it go?" "Ethan," They lied. They forged documents. This isn't just about money. It's about right and wrong. He sighs. I know, but think about what you're losing. Your family, your job, your peace. Your parents just want to fix things quietly. They even told me they'd offer me a partnership in the company if you dropped the case. Nora's face goes cold. They offered you a partnership? Ethan avoids her eyes. It's a good opportunity, Nora. I could help you. We could start over. Her hands tremble. You're asking me to betray my grandfather's memory. You're asking me to walk away from the truth. Ethan's silence says everything. Get out, Nora whispers, tears in her eyes. If you're on their side, then you were never on mine. When the door closes behind him, she sits on the floor and cries until her chest hurts. In just a few months, she's lost her family, her career, and now the man she thought loved her. But even in her pain, something inside her begins to change. The fog of fear slowly clears. She starts to see things more clearly than ever before. Her grandfather hadn't left her that inheritance out of favoritism. It wasn't because she was his favorite grandchild. It was because he knew this moment would come. He had seen what her parents were capable of. The money wasn't a gift, it was protection. The next morning, Nora wakes up early and goes for a walk. The air feels sharp and fresh. For the first time in weeks, she feels a strange sense of peace. She returns to the courthouse stronger. Every time her father's lawyer throws an accusation, she answers calmly. Every time her parents glare at her, she lifts her chin and stands taller. She's not fighting for money anymore. She's fighting for her grandfather's honor, for her own dignity, and for the truth. The days ahead are still tough, but Nora no longer feels powerless. The fear that once held her down has turned into quiet determination. She may have lost everything she once depended on, but in return, she has gained something priceless. The strength to stand on her own and the courage to fight for what is right. In court, the Daniels lawyer stands tall and confident, his voice echoing across the room. He points toward Nora and says, Your Honor, the evidence shows that Miss Nora Daniels manipulated her grandfather during his illness. She influenced him to change his will while he was weak and confused. This is a clear act of greed. Nora sits at her table, her hands clasped tightly together. She can feel everyone's eyes on her. The judge, the jury, her parents. Her throat feels dry, but she forces herself to stay calm. That's not true, she says quietly when it's her turn to speak. My grandfather was sick, yes, but his mind was strong. He knew what he wanted. He made his own decision. The opposing lawyer smirks. And yet, every decision seems to have benefited you, doesn't it? Her father, Michael, sits behind his lawyer looking pleased. Her mother, Elaine, crosses her arms, her face cold and proud. Nora feels a deep ache in her chest, but she doesn't let it show. The lawyer continues to attack her character, twisting every detail of her relationship with her grandfather. He even shows pictures of her visiting him in the hospital, suggesting she only did it to gain his trust. Each word cuts deeper. By midday, it feels like the entire court has turned against her. Even the judge looks uncertain. Nora glances at her notes, but her mind feels blank. She can't stop her hands from trembling. For a moment, she thinks about giving up. Maybe it isn't worth it anymore. Maybe her parents were right. Maybe she was never meant to carry the Daniels name. Then, just as the judge is about to speak, the doors at the back of the courtroom open. Everyone turns to look. A woman walks in, middle-aged, dressed in a nurse's uniform. She looks nervous but determined. Your Honor, she says, her voice shaking slightly. My name is Claire Thompson. I was Mr. Richard Daniels' nurse before he passed away. I have something that might change everything. The courtroom buzzes with whispers. The judge frowns. And what is that, Miss Thompson? Claire holds up a small flash drive. A video message recorded by Mr. Daniels himself, 2 weeks before his death. Nora's heart skips a beat. Her parents exchange panicked looks. The judge nods to the bailiff, who takes the flash drive and connects it to the screen in front of the courtroom. The lights dim slightly, and the video begins to play. There he is, Richard Daniels, sitting in his hospital bed, his voice calm and steady. His face looks tired but peaceful. If they ever try to take this from you, Nora, he says, looking straight into the camera, let this serve as proof. You were the only one who cared. The only one who stayed. You sat with me when I was in pain. You read to me when no one else bothered to visit. You have my heart and you have my trust. Don't let them make you feel unworthy. This inheritance is not about money. It's my way of saying thank you." The room goes silent. No one moves. Even the judge leans forward, eyes wide. Nora covers her mouth, tears filling her eyes. The sound of her grandfather's voice feels like a warm embrace. She had missed him so much, and now, even after death, he was still protecting her. Her father's face turns pale. Elaine lowers her head, shame flickering across her features for the first time. When the video ends, the judge looks around the courtroom. This video clearly shows Mr. Richard Daniels was of sound mind and made his decision knowingly. The will stands. Nora lets out a shaky breath, her whole body trembling with relief. The judge continues. Furthermore, evidence of forgery and fraud presented in this case will be reviewed by the district attorney. Mr. and Mrs. Daniels, your actions will face legal consequences. The courtroom erupts in whispers and gasps. Reporters start typing furiously. Nora sits in silence, her eyes closed, letting the moment sink in. She's won, not just the case, but her dignity, her voice, and her truth. As the session ends, her parents stand up to leave. Michael turns to her, his eyes full of anger and bitterness. "You destroyed this family," he says through clenched teeth. Nora looks at him, calm and steady. "No, Dad," she says softly. "You destroyed it long before the money." He glares at her, but says nothing more. Elaine reaches for his arm, and together they walk out of the courtroom, their heads bowed slightly. Nora watches them go, feeling both sad and free at the same time. She knows she's lost her family, but she's gained something far more important: self-respect, peace, and justice for the man who believed in her when no one else did. As she steps outside the courthouse, the sunlight touches her face. For the first time in a long while, she smiles. Not because she's rich, but because she finally feels seen, heard, and strong. Nora donates part of her inheritance to rebuild schools in her hometown. A simple but powerful act that touches many lives. She doesn't do it for attention or to prove a point. She does it because she knows that's what her grandfather would have wanted. The old school where she once studied, with broken windows and faded walls, is now filled with laughter again. Children run across the courtyard, holding new books and wearing bright uniforms. Every time Nora visits, she feels a quiet warmth in her heart. With the rest of the money, she starts a foundation in her grandfather's name, the Richard Daniels Scholarship Fund. The goal is to help underprivileged students chase their dreams, just like her grandfather helped her. She spends her days working on the project, meeting with young people, and helping them find opportunities for education. For the first time in years, she feels a sense of peace. The anger, pain, and betrayal from the court battle slowly fade into the background. She still has scars, but they don't control her anymore. At night, when she comes home to her small but cozy apartment, she often thinks about her grandfather. His voice still echoes in her memory, calm, wise, and full of love. On one quiet evening, she finds herself sitting on the couch, holding a small envelope that she's avoided for months. It's the letter her grandfather left her, sealed in his neat handwriting. Her hands tremble as she opens it. The paper is old but carefully folded. She takes a deep breath and begins to read. "My dearest Nora, if you're reading this, then I am no longer there to tell you these words myself. But I want you to remember this. You were never invisible to me. From the moment you were born, I saw something special in you. You had kindness in your heart and courage in your soul, even when others didn't see it. Life will test you, and people will try to make you doubt your worth. Don't let them. Family isn't always blood. It's the people who stand by you when no one else does. You are stronger than you think, and one day, you will use your strength to help others. That will be your true inheritance. Not the money, but the goodness you carry inside you." By the time she finishes reading, Nora's eyes are full of tears. She presses the letter against her chest and whispers, "I miss you, Grandpa." The words break her heart, but they also heal her. For so long, she thought she was fighting for the money, but now she understands. Her grandfather's real gift was faith. He believed in her when no one else did, and now she finally believes in herself. In the weeks that follow, Nora keeps working on the foundation. She meets students from poor families, listens to their stories, and helps them apply for scholarships. Seeing their joy reminds her of why she chose this path. It's not about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It's about giving others the same chance she was given. Sometimes she still thinks of her parents. They never apologized, and maybe they never will. But she no longer feels angry. She's learned to forgive, not for them, but for her own peace. On a warm afternoon, she visits the school again. The children run up to her, smiling and calling her Miss Nora. One little girl hands her a drawing of a tree with bright green leaves. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting, it says, "Thank you for helping us grow." Nora smiles through her tears. That small message means more to her than any court victory or inheritance ever could. As she walks back home, she feels light, free from the weight of the past. The world around her seems brighter, the air softer. She knows there will still be challenges ahead, but she's ready for them. For the first time in her life, Nora Daniels is truly at peace, living not in the shadow of her family, but in the light of her own purpose. Nora visits her grandfather's grave for the first time since the court ruling. The cemetery is quiet, with soft wind brushing against the trees. She walks slowly between the rows of headstones, holding a single white rose in one hand and a small glass jar in the other. The ashes of the burnt check her father destroyed. When she reaches his grave, she kneels down and places the rose gently on the stone. The name Richard Daniels is carved neatly into the marble, along with the words "a man of honor and heart." For a moment, she says nothing. The memories rush back. His warm smile, his gentle voice, the way he always called her "my bright girl." Tears fill her eyes, but this time, they are not from pain. They are from love and peace. "I did it, Grandpa," she whispers softly. "I stood up for you. For us. I hope I made you proud." She opens the jar and slowly pours the ashes beside the rose. The gray dust settles on the grass, carried gently by the wind. "They burned this," she says with a small, sad smile, "thinking they could destroy what you left me. But they were wrong." Her voice trembles, but there is strength in it, a strength her grandfather would have recognized. In her heart, a quiet voice echoes like a narration. "They burned the check thinking they'd burned my worth. But they only ignited something stronger, my freedom." Nora stands up, brushing the grass from her hands. She takes one last look at the grave, her eyes filled with both sorrow and gratitude. Then she turns to leave. As she walks away, the sun breaks through the clouds, its golden light falling gently across the cemetery. The white rose glows softly in the sunlight, a symbol of peace, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Nora keeps walking, her shoulders straight and her steps steady. For the first time in her life, she isn't running from her past, she's walking toward her future. Hey besties! Two Hearts, thanks so much for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing stories. See you in the next one. Waving hand sparkles.